Hey, welcome everyone. Thank you for joining me today. Sitting behind me here is a 2015 Chevy Silverado 5.3 liter V8 under the hood with about 170,000 miles. And today, guys, we're replacing the high pressure fuel pump for a leaking condition into the crankcase, which is causing this truck to run rich behind me. Now, if you're wondering how we got to this point, how we know we're putting a high pressure fuel pump in here, make sure to check out our, first part of this video here where I show the diagnosis. There's a link in the description down below. Today our focus is to simply replace the high pressure fuel pump, which is mounted in the valley of this V8 engine sitting behind me. Now, right off the bat, if you guys are not comfortable with doing this, please don't try to tackle this on your own. We're dealing with high pressure fuel. In fact, sitting in the fuel rail right now at this very second, we have 971 PSI inside of the rail. Now, fortunately enough, per the service procedure from GM on this truck, it's not difficult to bleed this system off or release the pressure in the high pressure fuel system. There's a procedure for that, and I'm going to show you guys that. But if you don't feel comfortable dealing with gasoline, dealing with fuel, dealing with high pressure fuel in particular, don't try to tackle this yourself at home. So what we have to do today, we have to remove the intake manifold, remove the sound insulator baffle that sits underneath, unbolt the high pressure fuel pump, make sure the engine is in the proper position so that when we bolt this guy in, we don't wreck the cam or this fuel pump itself. And then get everything else replaced, including two different pipes here that we're going to be replacing and the intake gaskets. If you're looking for part numbers on this stuff, check down below in the description, okay? This is, labor time on this is, I think, 2.2 hours, if I remember correctly. Obviously, this is not a 2.2 hour video. I'm going to be doing some time lapse here. So why don't we get right into the procedure for bleeding off the high pressure on the system. So we have the key on right now. We're recording 970 PSI in the rail. What GM suggests is you start up the engine and you pull the fuse for the fuel pump, which will stop low pressure fuel from making its way up to the rail. The rail should get emptied out of that high pressure fuel, and I guess we'll see what kind of fuel pressure we're left with residually after the fact. Let's do it. Okay, so with the truck idling, we'll look at the fuse box under the hood here, and you'll see fuse number 18 is for the fuel pump, which is in this upper left corner. Also, 59 right above that is the relay that says it's for the fuel pump. But interestingly enough, you can pull either of these and our low pressure fuel doesn't drop out like you would expect. What we actually have to do here is pull fuse 21, which is feeding the fuel pump pressure module, FPPM, fuse number 21, FPPM, and there we go. On our scan tool, our low pressure fuel has already dropped off to 0, and now we'll watch as we're draining down the high pressure fuel line right now. So what we're doing is we're using up all that residual fuel that's in the rail, and within a few seconds here, this truck should stall out once there's not enough high pressure fuel to make it run. And what we're going to do is we're going to crank it over a bunch to see, to go ahead and make sure we get as much pressure out of there as we can. It finally died. I mean, I guess I had to walk away from it to get it to die. You can see here our low pressure, our fuel rail pressure's down into the 100s here, but that was way longer than the 5 to 20 seconds that GM says it should take. So now what I'm gonna do, I'm just gonna crank this thing over and try to get any more of that fuel out of the rail. All right, so fuel rail pressure sensor 2 is reading 0 PSI, fuel rail pressure sensor 1, 14.5 PSI. I feel pretty comfortable disconnecting this high pressure fuel system. Now, when we get to that point, we're actually loosening up the connection points. I'm still gonna throw a rag over it, safety glasses on, I'll have gloves on type of thing, just in case our sensors are lying to us. But right now we have a truck behind us that doesn't start because we've disabled the fuel system by pulling our appropriate fuse, that fuse 21. Make sure you pull fuse 21 because for whatever reason, fuse 18 didn't do the trick. So I guess at this point, let's start ripping this intake manifold off. I would love to have a word with whoever decided to include 1, 2, 3, 4 Christmas trees type of, well, these are like industrial grade Christmas tree type clips on the back side of the intake manifold for a wiring harness. You couldn't just include a 10mm bolt in there and use some sort of like J-nut or something on there? At least that way, even though we can't see it, it would actually, unbolt easy and we could get the harness out of the way. Whew. Those Christmas tree clips have been the hardest part of the job so far. Well, anyways, here's the intake manifold off. We'll be replacing the gaskets when this guy goes back on. We'll leave it out of the way for now. Oh, and also your pro tip for the day, for those of you that weren't paying super close attention, when I was actually undoing or removing all the bolts for the intake manifold, it helps in pulling the intake to actually remove all the bolts. Who'd have thought? All right, so here is our, high pressure fuel pump insulator. Basically, it's a big chunk of foam. And the goal is gonna be to remove this guy without dropping any crap down into the heads. So there's some stuff on top of here. We want to try to get this guy out of here. There we go. So leaving all that dust and stuff on there. And then it's gone. So I don't know about you guys, but at this point in the job, I always like to wipe down the heads, kind of get them prepped for reassembly, and then tape them shut to ensure I don't accidentally drop anything inside of the motor. Okay, there's a 10mm bolt right here to loosen up the fuel rail because this is a pretty rigid pipe right here. So now we have our low side disconnected. We'll kind of pull that guy just out of the way. And then what I'm gonna do is I have a replacement line for this here, this guy. I have a replacement line for this one. And I bought a replacement line for this one too. I don't know that you really need to do both. We'll see what this connection looks like when it comes apart. But anytime you break these nuts loose right here, that pipe's got to get replaced. These are like a one-time fit type of thing. So what I'm going to do So I'm going to put my rag over it. And I'm just going to break it loose. I'm going to leave it sit there for a few seconds, just in case it has some residual pressure in there. And there we go, I can turn it by hand already. There we go. So this ball fitting right here is what actually gets kind of crushed when you tighten that nut down. That right there, it's a one-time fit. And that's going to be the same thing on this end of the line. So this is one of the pipes that we're replacing today. And I don't really see any reason to replace this. Okay, soak up some of this residual fuel here. And so I don't see really any reason in replacing this pipe here. We're not touching this nut or this nut, which is what attaches to our rail. And this guy is a socket here. So if the theory is that when you tighten the ball joint into the socket, that the socket gets ruined as well, then why wouldn't we be replacing the fuel rail also? So I'm going to actually look at returning this line back to the dealer, not using it. But again, it's your choice. If you buy both lines, replace them both if you want. I don't see any reason for it. The service procedure doesn't specifically call for replacement of that pipe. The pipe that's to be replaced is the one that goes from this S-shaped pipe back to the high pressure fuel pump. All right, we'll disconnect the electrical connector on the pump. Okay, now it says to loosen these evenly so that damage to the plunger doesn't occur. There we go. Bring our gasket with us. Okay, there's our old high pressure fuel pump. I'll go ahead and toss my rag over that hole there to at least cover it up so nothing can fall in there while I'm talking over here. So yeah, I guess somehow we have a leak in this surface here. I would assume how it goes into the crankcase. That's what we're thinking. And maybe bring this up to the microscope and take a look and see if I can see anything. But I mean, there's definitely a redesigned part number for this guy, so there's definitely a known issue with this thing. Okay, so before we can install this new high pressure fuel pump onto this 5.3 liter, we got to make sure that we have the engine in the proper position so we don't wreck the new pump or the cam follower or the cam itself, okay? So per the service procedure, we want to be on the exhaust stroke, top dead center on cylinder 1. Cylinder 1, top dead center, exhaust stroke. So how do we determine that? Well, if we think about the way the engine operates, when the piston is coming up, it goes up on compression, and it goes up on exhaust and down on the other two strokes. So when we're traveling downwards on the intake stroke, the intake valve should be open. If we're traveling downwards on the power stroke, the intake valve should be closed because we want to keep that explosion inside of the cylinder, forcing the piston downwards. So if we apply that logic and we watch what the valve is doing, I have my camera in there. If we watch what the valve is doing in relation to how the piston is traveling, we'll be able to determine if it's on exhaust or compression. So let's take a look and see what it's doing right now. I've already pulled the spark plug out. I'm going to use this nice long pick that I have to be able to determine the position of the piston inside of the cylinder and then we're going to watch the valve as I crank the engine over by hand using this big 24mm socket. The piston is definitely not at the top right now. Looking at where the valve is in position, it's open, which tells me we're likely on the intake stroke. All right, so we'll spin this over. And as we get down to the bottom dead center here, the intake valve should close and we'll come up on compression. All right, piston is now traveling upwards. Okay, it feels like it's right about a top dead center there. It stopped moving a little. And now we're on our way back down. Now we know we're not on the intake stroke right now because, well, we finished the intake stroke just before this, and our intake valve is closed. This tells me we're on the power stroke, which means the next time the piston travels up will be the exhaust stroke. Couldn't have made the head of the bolt just a little bit larger on here to hold the socket better. Just keeps falling off. All right, piston is beginning to travel back upwards. And I would believe we should see a slight amount of overlap on here. So we should see that intake valve move just slightly as we come up to top dead center on exhaust, as we begin the intake stroke, essentially. So we're getting really close to the top here. There, it moved. Yep. And piston is just about to start traveling back down. And if you guys caught that, I know the resolution is horrible with the little camera, but the intake valve just ever so slightly moved, which tells me piston is now at the top dead center of the exhaust stroke. We're now ready to go ahead and install our pump. Now, the book says that we're supposed to draw those down hand tight, alternating back and forth. So that's what we'll try to do here. We'll see what happens. Okay, so the new fuel pump is in. I got to install this line, plug everything back in, get the intake manifold back on. I'm gonna get that handled because really it's the same way that it came apart. Make sure when you tighten this line down, these are torqued, each of these nuts are torqued to 22 foot-pounds. So make sure you go ahead and torque those down. But I'll do the boring stuff off camera here, get everything back together, new intake gaskets going on the manifold, get everything bolted back up, fire it up and see how she runs. I'll be right back. All right, so I just got back from test driving this thing. I have about an hour and a half on it between idling, driving it, making sure all the monitors and everything reset. So I finished everything up last night, got the new pump all finalized, got the intake back on, all of that. I also changed the oil and filter right away. It's a really good idea if you're running into a leaking high pressure fuel pump. It puts all that fuel into the oil, it dilutes the oil, it actually overfills the oil on this one. So make sure that you change the oil out as well. It's a good idea. So fresh oil in here, new high pressure fuel pump. The data looks excellent. You can see here we have a runtime of 16 minutes on here. I only recorded a minute of it, but 16 minutes of runtime at idle at that 212 degree mark. Our field trims on here, guys, are just beautiful. This is exactly what we're looking for field trims. This truck's got 170K on it, and the field trims look excellent. So this is fixed. This is good to go down the road. Monitors are reset. We're good to give this back to the customer. So I hope you enjoyed the video. I hope this helps you when you're installing a high pressure fuel pump. Things to note, get rid of the pressure in the high pressure fuel system before you go trying to disassemble it. You don't want to have 1,000 PSI in that fuel rail when you try to go and disassemble it. Another thing you want to do is make sure that the cylinder 1 is on top dead center of the exhaust stroke. I showed you guys how to do that. And then pro tip, when you're reinstalling the intake, make sure to put that stupid little piece of foam sound insulator stuff back on. Otherwise, you'll have to remove the intake and do it again. Ask me how I know. All right. So thank you guys so much for watching. I really appreciate it. Don't forget to give us that thumbs up, subscribe to the channel if you haven't already, and make sure to click on that little bell icon so you get notifications when we come out with the next video. Again, I really appreciate you all watching. Thank you so much. We'll see you in the next one. Happy wrenching, everyone. Thank you.